Hi, today we're looking for pied flycatchers and spotted flycatchers. Now when I'm looking for things, I spend a lot more time sitting stationary than I do walking about. You can walk through this woodland and you'll see a certain amount of birds, but you're just moving birds as you go. If you sit still and watch from one place and just watch in that direction for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then you move on and you move 30, 40 meters that way and you sit and you watch the same area from a different angle, very soon you start to realize there's a regular pattern happening. A bird is frequently flying from one place to the other, and you realize there's some sort of activity there that you can photograph. So if you want to find pied flycatchers or spotted flycatchers and you know they're in this wood, it's the best thing to do. It's just to sit still and watch. Now there's lots of nest boxes for pied flycatchers in this wood, so it didn't take me long to find one. 2 or 3 minutes and I could see a bird going in and out of a nest box. So it's just a question of how am I going to photograph it. I could just sit down on a stool. They're quite tolerant birds, pied flycatchers, and if I sat at a distance and then just gradually move forward, I think they'd take no notice of me. Especially today because I've got the OM1 camera with the 150 to 400mm lens. That's got a built-in 1.25 extender, so that makes it a 500mm lens, and then it's got a 2x crop factor, so it's the equivalent of a 1000mm lens at f5.6. I've never had a lens with that pulling power before. I used to have the Canon 800mm 5.6, but now I've got a 1000mm, and then I've got the 1.4 I could put on it as well, making a 1400mm. But I prefer to put up a hide, and they're quite tolerant birds, as I say, so I can put up a hide. They will take absolutely no notice of it. Initially I'm going to put it up slightly further back than I want to, because I'm not going to try and take pictures because the sun keeps coming out. It's really too contrasty. I wouldn't normally attempt to do woodland photography on a sunny day, but the forecast was cloudy bright, so I've followed that forecast, which is always a mistake, and I've come to do these. If it carries on being too sunny, I'm going to have to give up and come back later. I suspect the day will get cloudier as it goes on. But I'm just going to put the Buteo hide up now and then sit in and see what happens. What I really like about these Buteo hides is how quick they go up and equally fast to take down as well. And it's quite stable. You don't have to put guy ropes on it unless it's very windy, and very rarely do I bother putting guy ropes into the floor at the base either. It's just up in a moment. When I did start taking pictures, I was disappointed that the birds only used the higher branches and weren't coming down level with me, and I don't like these up and under pictures. So I had a second tripod with me, and using a bit of tape I attached a branch to the handle, which I could then place close to the nest box and encourage the birds to land on this branch. The great advantage of using a tripod is you can change the height and the angle that this is at and twist it around all sorts of ways. If you're going to use ones with leaves on, which certainly is better at this time of year, you might have to change it every hour or so, otherwise it starts to look a bit wilted. But that will give us a lower perch, and I'm sure the birds will land on it straight away, and I can get it in the right position. So we've now got the birds coming down low, but we've still got the problem of the horrible catch lights from the sunlight in the background. Those catch lights are moving round, and I can move the hide a little bit to try and avoid them, but they keep coming back. It's just too sunny, too contrasty. The birds are posing well. I'm quite happy to use my new perch.
After an hour or so, I decided to give up and come back later in the day. Hopefully the light would improve.
So now we're back, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun is mostly behind the clouds now, just occasionally poking out, so it's a much nicer light. You don't want cloudy dull, you want cloudy bright lighting, and that's what we've got now. So we've still got a reasonable shutter speed. I don't need a fast shutter speed, I'm not going to attempt flight photography here. It's just birds sitting on the perch, so you can come down to 200th of a second and still get sharp pictures.
And I'm much happier with this lighting. I was using 3200 ISO and getting a shutter speed of around 2/50th to 3/20th of a second. It helps with the contrast of a black and white bird as well, to have soft lighting. It does rule out the chance of doing any flight photography. I'm going to have a ridiculously high ISO to be able to do flight pictures, but it's good enough for portraits. And now we'll move on to the spotted flycatchers.
Spotted flycatchers used to be an extremely common bird. They were found in every farmyard, every churchyard, people's back gardens. You saw an old building, there was a very good chance there would be spotted flycatcher nesting there. This is when I was a teenager. Now they're very scarce and you've really got to go out your way to find them. Cemeteries are still one of the places you will find them. So I'd heard there was one here. I arrived, I walked around for probably less than 30 seconds and I could see it because it's going to be obvious. It's going to be sitting on top of one of these gravestones somewhere. And as soon as I saw it, I then look around and think, if I was a spotted flycatcher, where would I nest? Now there are some quite big tombstones here, rather than just a gravestone like this. It's a proper enclosure. And potentially they could nest there, and then nest in trees as well. Often nest where the branch splits into two and you've got a crevice in between. They nest in there. But if you've only got one pair in this churchyard, the most likely place they're going to nest, the prime location, would be in the church building, high up. They prefer to be high than low, it's safer. So as soon as I saw one on the gravestone over this way, I left it alone and walked towards the church building and just sat and watched the church. I watched it for 5 minutes on one side and then went the other side and watched it for 5 minutes, and I saw a spotted flycatcher fly up towards the roof. Didn't see where it went initially and it just disappeared. 10 minutes later it reappeared on top of the guttering, so I figured the nest was there somewhere. And you scan with the binoculars and just underneath the guttering you could see what seemed to be a nest. So then you just watch it for a few more minutes until you see one of the adults fly up to it.
I'm not sure that the name spotted flycatcher is really appropriate. Perhaps they should call it the streaked flycatcher. But it's a very popular bird, bird watchers like them. It's a grey bird, not very spectacular, but it's got a charisma about it. And they sit on one perch for hours on end, flying out, catching insects, returning to the same perch. Photography was quite easy. They are so used to people because of the conditions they normally live in around people's buildings. I could just sit there on my stool. I didn't need a hide and they would take no notice of me. I did have the same problem as with the pied flycatchers. I've got too many highlights in the background. It was still too sunny. All I could do was wait for more cloudy conditions, and the sun kept coming and going. Shutter speeds were very similar to the pied flycatcher, around 2/50th of a second to 3/20th, but the ISO I kept a bit lower. It was 1600, which is my default setting with the OM1 camera. The other thing I could do was shoot from a different angle, so I've got the church wall behind the bird, but so long as I'm zoomed in tight, you can't tell it's a church wall. It's sufficiently out of focus, and I preferred that to the green background where the sun kept lighting it up. Initially the birds weren't carrying food back to the nest, but towards the end of the session they did start to occasionally, so I suspect the youngsters were just hatching out. Perhaps there was just one hatched at this point. When I went back the following day they were feeding every 2 minutes or so. They'd obviously all hatched out. I didn't need to use a hide at all. These birds are very used to people walking about in the churchyard. I could just sit on my stool and keep still and they'd come very close to me. Thanks for watching.